Just a few months ago, Denny Hamlin was trading insults with Kyle Busch, calling him out on his podcast, getting blocked by him on the racetrack, on purpose, in front of millions of people. By any honest measure, the two of them were feuding. So when Denny Hamlin climbed out of his car in victory lane at Nashville on Sunday night, expected him to do the one thing in this entire sport that always belonged to Kyle Busch and to no one else. He bowed. He stood there in front of the grandstands, and he took a bow. And if you didn't know the history, you might have missed what you were looking at. But everybody in that garage knew. Everybody watching at home knew. And in that single silent gesture, this stopped being a story about a race at all. So today I want to walk you through exactly what that bow meant. Why a man who'd been at war with Kyle Busch chose to honor him with Kyle's own signature. What makes that gesture hit so hard? And why a lot of people watching couldn't get through it with dry eyes. Because the full weight of this doesn't land until you understand everything that came before it. If you care about the human side of this sport, the moments that go deeper than the finishing order, then this is the channel for you, and I'd be grateful if you'd hit subscribes, so these stories keep finding you. I'll keep this part short today, because this one deserves. Let's go back to Victory Lane. Picture the scene. It's late on a Sunday night at Nashville Superspeedway. Denny Hamlin has just pulled off one of the most remarkable drives of his entire career to win the Cracker Barrel 400. A win we broke down in full in another video. And it's an incredible story on its own. He's earned every right to celebrate. This is his moment, his trophy, his night. And instead of celebrating it like it was his, he gave it away. He climbed from the car, walked toward the crowd, and bowed to the grandstands. A deliberate, unmistakable bow. Not a wave, not a fist pump, a bow. The exact celebration that one specific driver had made famous over 20 years in this sport. The showman's bow that the fans had seen 1,000 times from one man, and one man only. That man was Kyle Busch. And Kyle Busch wasn't there to take it. Because Kyle Busch is gone. To understand why that gesture stopped people cold, you have to understand what the bow actually was. It wasn't just a celebration. It was Kyle Busch's entire personality compressed into one motion. Kyle was from Las Vegas, and he raced like it, like a showman who knew the crowd was watching. For most of his career, he was the driver fans loved to hate. He was brash. He was abrasive. He spoke his mind and never apologized for it. He got into fights on pit road. He feuded openly with anyone and everyone. They called him Rowdy. They called him Wild Thing. And when the boos rained down on him, when an entire grandstand was on its feet, jeering him after he beat their favorite, Kyle Busch didn't shrink from it. He bowed. He leaned to the role of the villain and turned it into theater. The boos only made him perform harder. That bow was him telling a hostile crowd, in the most charismatic way possible, that he heard them. He didn't. And he'd just beaten their guy anyway. It became his signature. It became one of the most recognizable images in the entire sport. You saw that bow, and you knew exactly who it was, even from the cheap seats. So when another driver, a rival no less, performs that exact bow in victory lane, there is no ambiguity about what's being said. It is a tribute. A specific, personal, unmistakable tribute to a man who can no longer take a bow of his own. And here is the part that makes all of this so heavy. The reason Kyle Busch couldn't be there to celebrate his own legacy is that, just days before this race, the NASCAR world lost him. Kyle Busch died on Thursday, May 21st, 2026. He was 41 years old. He left behind a wife, 2 young children, a brother, and an entire sport that frankly is still trying to process the size of the hole he left. I want to be careful and respectful here. So let me just give you the facts as they are. He had been battling an illness. He was hospitalized. And then suddenly, far too soon, he was gone. The details of those final days are painful. And I'm not going to sensationalize a family's worst moment for the sake of a video. You won't find that here. What matters for this story is the shock of it. 1 week, one of the most accomplished drivers in the history of the sport is winning races and standing in victory lane. The next, he's gone. There's a detail that has stuck with a lot of people, including me, at what turned out to be one of his final race wins. A reporter asked Kyle why moments like that never get old, and he answered, almost offhandedly, that you never know when the last one is. He meant it as a veteran's wisdom. Cherish every win, because you can't count on the next one. Nobody listening had any reason to hear it as anything more than that. In hindsight, it's almost impossible to listen to. And here's the context that makes the whole sport feel the loss so deeply. Kyle Busch is the first active NASCAR Cup Series driver to die since Dale Earnhardt Sr. passed away on the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500. That's 25 years. An entire generation of racing went by without the sport, losing one of its own at the top level. And now it has happened again. That's the cloud that hung over Nashville this weekend. That's the grief everyone in that garage carried onto the track. So when the race was won, the celebration was never going to be simple. Now let's get to the part that turns this from a touching gesture into something genuinely powerful. Because it would be one thing if a close friend had done that bow. It's another thing entirely that it was Denny Hamlin. Because Hamlin and Busch have history. Long, complicated, and very recent history. The two of them were teammates for years at Joe Gibbs Racing. They came up in the same shop, raced under the same banner, won under the same colors. There's a bond that forms there, whether you like each other or not. But in the months before Kyle's death, that relationship had turned sharp again. On his podcast, Hamlin had publicly suggested that expecting Kyle to return to his old winning form at his new team just wasn't realistic. It was the kind of honest but cutting take that gets back to a driver fast. And Kyle Busch, being Kyle Busch, fired right back. He said, in so many words, that he could make Hamlin's life miserable on the racetrack. And then he went out and did exactly that. He threw a pointed block on Hamlin during a crucial moment at Kansas, a move that helped shape how that race ended. The week after, fresh off a win at Dover, Kyle delivered the perfect mic drop. Asked about his turnaround, he said, he guessed he just remembered how to drive. That was the relationship. Competitive, prickly, two proud champions needling each other in public. So sit with a picture for a second. A driver who, weeks earlier, had been on the receiving end of Kyle Busch's barbs and Kyle Busch's blocks. That's the man who wins at Nashville, climbs from his car, and chooses to honor Kyle with Kyle's own celebration. That's not what a grudge looks like. That's what respect looks like when the noise gets stripped away and only the truth is left. The feud was real, so is something much bigger. And we don't have to guess at that, because Denny Hamlin told us. In the days after Kyle's death, the grief in his words was impossible to miss. He posted that he simply could not comprehend the news, that the focus needed to be on Kyle's family, and he signed it the way teammates sign things. We love you, KB. This is a man who'd been trading shots with Kyle on a podcast, now publicly heartbroken. But it was what he said on national television that really cut through. Speaking on Good Morning America, Hamlin called Kyle Busch the most gifted and talented race car driver to ever sit in a car, the most talented ever. From a competitor, from a guy who'd been feuding with him. That is about as high as praise gets in this sport. And then he reached for a comparison that told you exactly how big this loss felt to the people inside it. He said it was NASCAR's version of losing Kobe Bryant. That's not a comparison you make about a colleague you merely respected. That's how you describe losing a once-in-a-generation icon. Someone whose talent transcended the rivalries, the eras, the arguments. That's how Denny Hamlin sees Kyle Busch. And that's the feeling he carried into victory lane on Sunday night. Which is why, when the win finally came, the bow wasn't a decision. It was the only thing that made sense. And Hamlin wasn't the only rival carrying the Zen. And that's worth sitting with, because it tells you something true about Kyle Busch. Brad Keselowski, a driver who battled Kyle as hard as anyone ever did, on the track and in the press, wrote one of the most widely shared tributes of all. He said he'd made Kyle earn every victory and stolen a few from him along the way, and that the two of them had taken their shots at each other for years. And then he wrote the line that broke people, that he now felt a little like the coyote with no more road runner to chase. Read that again, Arrival. Describing his entire career as a chase that suddenly has no one left to chase. That is not how you grieve a stranger. That is how you grieve the person who made you better. And it was happening all over the sport at once. The booing crowds, the rival drivers, the people who'd spent 20 years fighting Kyle Busch, all discovering in the same instant how much they were going to miss him. The bow at Nashville was one voice in that chorus. Maybe the most eloquent one, because it needed no words at all. So who, exactly, did that bow honor? Let's talk about the driver, because the numbers are almost hard to believe. Across NASCAR's 3 national series, Kyle Busch won 234 races. 234. That is more than any driver in the history of the sport. More than the names on the trophies. More than anyone who has ever strapped into a stock car. To put it in perspective, that's well clear of the great Richard Petty on the combined list. In the Cup Series alone, he won 63 races, which puts him among the top 10 winningest drivers of all time. He won 2 Cup Series championships in 2015 and 2019, and in 2015, he did it after breaking his leg and his foot in a brutal crash at the start of the season. Doctors estimated 6 months on the sidelines. He was back in 3, and he won the title that same year. That's not a normal athlete. That's a different category of competitor. His fans called themselves Rowdy Nation, and they were fiercely, joyfully loyal. And here's the thing that even his harshest critics, the ones doing the booing, would admit without hesitation. The man could flat out drive anything. Put him in any car, on any track, in any series, and he was a threat to win. That was never in question. Not by his rivals, not by his critics, not by anybody who actually watched. The bow was loud and brash and theatrical, but it was backed up by one of the greatest bodies of work this sport has ever produced. And behind the showman was a husband and a father. Kyle is survived by his wife Samantha, by his young daughter, and by his son Brexton. There's a detail here that I can barely get through. Kyle's final post on social media wasn't about racing. It was a birthday message to Brexton, who had just turned 11. He wrote about how proud he was of the young man his son was becoming, on and off the track, and told him there was no limit to what he could accomplish. A father proud of his boy. That was the last thing Kyle Busch shared with the world, and the sport has already found a way to make sure that boy's future has a place to land. Kyle's longtime team announced that they are setting his car number aside, keeping it ready for the day he's ready to go NASCAR racing himself. The number isn't being retired into a museum. It's being saved, it's waiting. And if that day comes, Brexton won't just be carrying a number. He'll be carrying the legacy of the winningest driver in the history of the sport. That's the image to hold on to. Because that bow in victory lane and that number waiting in the shop are really the same gesture. A sport refusing to let go of a man it wasn't ready to lose, and promising in its own way that he won't be forgotten. So let's bring it all the way back around. Why did this one moment hit so much harder than a normal celebration? Because of everything stacked behind it. A sport in mourning, grieving one of its own for the first time in 25 years. A driver who'd been feuding with the man who died, choosing respect over the grudge. A win that was earned for one man but offered up to another. And a single wordless bow that said everything that 1,000 words couldn't. That's the thing about sports at their best. Sometimes the scoreboard is the least important thing on the track. Sometimes a grown man takes a bow he didn't have to take for a rival he'd been fighting with, in front of a crowd that understood instantly, and an entire sport feels it at once. There were no speeches needed. There was just a bow, and it belonged to Kyle. I'd love to hear from you on this one, and I want to keep it warm. Drop your favorite Kyle Busch memory down in the comments. The win that made you a fan, or the win that made you a hater, or the bow that made you shake your head and smile. Whatever it is, share it. Let's fill the comments with the good stuff, the stuff worth remembering. Rowdy Nation, this section is yours tonight. And if you want the full story of the drive that set all of this up, how Denny Hamlin got penalized on the very first lap, felt it, and clawed his way back to win this race at a track that never let him win before. I broke that whole thing down in a separate video that's right here on the channel. Go watch that one next. It's the other half of this night. I also covered this race from Christopher Bell's side. The win that nearly was, and that one's waiting for you too. The boos are quiet now, but somewhere on Sunday night in Nashville, a rival gave the crowd one more bow. The last one Rowdy will ever get, and the number 8 sits waiting.